Hi everybody, Clixosia here. Welcome to another video. I'm back again for another year-end best books video, but this one will be a little different from last year's because I did read more books this year than last year, but I think the last video was a little too long, so to reduce the length of the video, I'm going to whittle it down to just 8 of my favorite books in no particular order, so let's get right into it. The first book I'm going to be talking about is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Many of you have probably read this book. It's such a classic. It's a novel set in 1930s Alabama, and the story is narrated in first person by young Scout Finch, who is 6 to 8 years old in the time of the novel. Her father, Atticus Finch, is a lawyer who defends a black man wrongly accused of the rape of a white girl. This novel is a portrait of racism and class prejudices in 1930s America. It really tells you that people could have such deep-rooted prejudices from one another, even though we're all basically human. As Scout Finch says, I think there's only one kind of folks. But this is not exactly the attitude of the people in that town, even though they know that the black man is innocent. What I loved about this book is the writing style. It basically exudes a lot of calmness, even in the most tense or tragic moments. It's humorous when it has to be, serious when it has to be, and I think it perfectly captures the emotions of the narrator. This was, I think, the most perfect novel I read this year because it's really so good. There's not a single sentence that's wasted in this book, and I love the descriptions of the characters. Atticus Finch has become one of my favorite characters in fiction so far, so I think you should really read this book. They don't call it a classic for no reason. It's simply wonderful. The next book I'm going to be talking about is Caesar and Cleopatra by George Bernard Shaw. This one's a play, actually, not a novel, and I think it's a little rare. Well, my last book was a classic that a lot of people have probably read already. I haven't heard of a lot of people talking about this one, but I think the ones who haven't read it are seriously missing out because this was one of the funniest things I read this year. Basically, Julius Caesar is looking for Pompey in Egypt, but instead he meets the Queen Cleopatra. The portrayal of Cleopatra in this novel is a little different from the one we're used to because she's not a stately queen woman yet, she's just a child. It is Caesar who teaches her how to act more regal and to really become a queen in this book. It is riddled with humor from the way that Caesar mispronounces the name of Cleopatra's nurse, and the way that Cleopatra tells an old man how afraid she is of Julius Caesar and how she thinks he will eat her because that's what Romans do apparently, only to realize that the man she was talking to was Caesar himself. That's just a few of the many humorous incidents in this book. There was also tragedy, of course, but I think the one thing that struck me the most about this book was its humor. It is so unexpected, really. I think it's because we don't really think about the past that much. When we think about that far distant past, we can't possibly imagine that the people who lived so long back were just like us, but this book proves otherwise. In fact, it even says that in the prologue to the play, in which the Egyptian god Ra speaks to the audience, thus breaking the fourth wall. And you shall marvel after your ignorant manner that men 20 centuries ago were already just such as you, and spoke and lived as ye speak and live, no worse and no better, no wiser and no sillier. I think that encapsulates the feeling reading this book gave me. I think I'm used to a tragic picture of Julius Caesar, but this one was very refreshing. Caesar basically acts as a nice old man, a mentor to Cleopatra, and he makes her the queen that she later becomes. The next book I'd like to recommend is The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, another famous book. Faulkner's writing is known to be really difficult to read, and I must admit I don't think I've understood everything in this book on my first reading. I'll have to read it a second time to really appreciate it probably, but I still really loved the writing style of this book just because it's so different, so unique, and so audacious, really. The novel is a story of the Compson family where every member is like a stranger to each other and there is no understanding or love between them. But still, it is a really interesting study in character and emotions, I think. All 4 of the narratives, like The book is split into 4 different points of view. 3 of them are members of the Compson family. The 4th is a third-person narrator. All 4 of those narratives focus on one character, and we can tell that they're all haunted by one another. In fact, the title of the book comes from Shakespeare's iconic quote, "Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." The idiot in Faulkner's story is Benzie Compson, who narrates the first point of view. He is supposed to be an idiot because he does not seem to understand everything. I think that's the magic of the writing style, because he sees things that are happening around him. He hears things. He is more like a recorder, more like an observer than somebody who tries to grasp what's happening around him. In his narrative, the past and the present are all blended together. It's like he experiences them all at the same moment. All of the things he sees reminds him of another day, and he does not draw conclusions between things. That's what made it so different from every other narrator we are used to reading, because in first-person narrator, the narrator usually has a lot of opinions of their own. The narration is basically incomplete without them, but this narration by Benzie does not really have any opinions of his own. In fact, the only few times we can see that Benzie is a thinking creature is when he says that he does something because of something else, like when he says he does something because his sister Caddy told him to do it. That's one of the few rare moments in which we can actually see him drawing conclusions from his observations, like connecting consequences to actions and vice versa. I think it was so masterfully executed. It's like, in his world, things simply happen without any natural chain of events connecting one thing from another, and that's what felt so unique about reading this part of the book. In fact, the final sentence of Benzie's part felt like a break from the rest of his narration, because in it he actually forms an opinion for himself. A contradiction, actually. The sentence is, "Then the dark began to go in smooth, bright shapes, like it always does, even when Caddy says that I have been asleep." That is one of the reasons why I love this book. To understand this book, you really have to read it to the end, I think. And Faulkner really tries to confuse us at the start of the book. We don't really know what's happening. It's like the mist slowly starts to clear as you go further in the book, when the memories and the thoughts, the actions of the other characters begin to corroborate the events that were narrated by other characters earlier in this book. That's when things finally start to be clear. They really had to keep thinking while you're reading this book. 5 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. The next book I'm going to be talking about is The Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee Divakarini. This book is a retelling of the Mahabharata from Draupadi's point of view, and I should tell you that it is not an exact or completely faithful version of the Mahabharata. The author does take a few liberties with the story. Draupadi is not exactly the nicest character in the book. You will not always like her personality. The fact that it does borrow so much, almost everything from the Mahabharata, does contribute to how good the book is, because it's a story that we all know, we've all heard of it, and watching it play out again through a different perspective is really nice and refreshing. That was one of the key strengths of this book. What I especially liked was knowing the fates of the characters, and the feeling in the books that they know it too, that they have already been forewarned about their futures from different quarters, but they still knowingly stumble towards their tragedies. The fun part about this book is that it is not always Draupadi who's narrating. There are some small sections in which the author hands the torch over to another character. So there is a lot of foreshadowing in this book, which might be annoying to some people, but I think it was executed very well. Next is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is another novel based on mythology, Greek mythology this time. It's based on the story of Circe, who is a Greek goddess and the daughter of the sun god Helios. I don't really know the original mythology surrounding Circe. I've only heard her mentioned in the Odyssey by Homer, but I did enjoy this book as a standalone novel. Its writing style is really gorgeous. It's written in first person, narrated by Circe. You can almost hear the defiance, the anger that's simmering beneath the surface in her narration, because the main style of the book leans towards a really calm tone of voice, almost submissive really. It's like the character takes everything as it comes her way without protest, but we can also really feel just how strong her emotions are in some of the passages. So it's really interesting to see how Miller made you feel those emotions that lurk beneath the surface. So in the story, she discovers that she's a witch, and she accidentally transforms a fellow nymph into a monster, and she's banished to to the island of Aiaia for that, where she meets Odysseus among many other people. This is a really interesting story. I love the ending, and I also love the different characters that Tsurugi meets in her journey. The thing that struck me the most about this book was its ingenious use of metaphors and similes. Until I read this book, I used to think that they were really very basic things, but this book showed me just how far you could go with a simple simile. Like, for example, her hand withdrew like a door slamming shut. She sets the words in the room precise as stones in a mosaic. And there are many more examples like this throughout this book. I'll read another quote out from here. This is a beautiful one. In a solitary life, there are rare moments when another soul dips near yours, as stars once a year brush the earth. Such a constellation was he to me. This is a really wonderful book. I really think you should read it. Tsurugi by Madeline Miller. Next is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. It's an extremely thick book, but it was so worth all 923 pages of it. It's a very simple story, really. David Copperfield narrates the story of his own life from birth to an advanced age, and all of the characters he meets along the way, all the humorous and tragic situations that he encounters, really make up this book. So David Copperfield does not do any really grand things. He's almost just another man, but it really is the trivial things that make up the most of life. What I really loved about this book were the characters. Of course, there was also the humor that we associate with Charles Dickens, but the characters in this book are really unforgettable, especially Agnes and Micawber. There's a quote I really love from Mr. Micawber, which he tells to David Copperfield. Annual income £20. Annual expenditure 1996. Result happiness. Annual income £20. Annual expenditure 2006. Result misery. So Mr. Micawber is constantly in debt, and this is the advice that he gives to David Copperfield. There's never a dull moment in this book. You might think that you'd get bored easily because it's so long, but no, it's really interesting and it does have a happy ending, so really is worth plodding through this entire book. And the opening sentence is, whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. And I'll leave it to you to find out. Next is Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. It is a dystopian novel which is about a scientist and a mother of four named Isla Stack, whose country, Ireland, descends into totalitarianism, and her husband is taken away. He never comes back. She keeps losing more and more people, and the story is about how she deals with it. So no matter how much her sister, who is in Canada, tries to convince her that history is a silent record of people who did not know that it was time to leave, Alice disagrees. She says that she cannot leave, and by reading this, we'll feel like we cannot leave this book either, because there are practically no paragraphs in this. There are section divisions, but that's the most we're going to get. It is a suffocating feeling, like many other people have already said about this book. There are also no quotation marks either, so while reading the conversations, the dialogues, you might have to think a little to understand who the speaker is, and you might have to figure it out from the context. I love the style of the book. There was such an atmosphere to this book, really, because really sucks you into the story, I think. I'll read out a few quotes from the book. It is impossible to see the true self. You can only see what you are not or what you want to be. It is the heart that beats the man until the man is beaten. How alien the world in the blue hour of dawn, and yet it is known, the rain murmuring in the trees. It is an ancient rain that speaks to the place where it has always fallen, the cherry trees rooted in the earth, a strip of ruined life for every week he's gone. A lot has been said about this book. It won the Booker Prize 2023, so many of you might have read this book already, but if you haven't, I would still recommend it. My last book is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I don't have a physical copy of the book with me, but the impression of reading it still stuck with me. I read the English translation by Constance Garnett. The book is a novel which is about how an ex-student named Raskolnikov convinces himself that murdering a certain old lady would be the right thing to do, and it details his mental anguish and moral dilemmas both before and after the murder, and it sketches out his path to repentance. This was one of the best books I read in my life. I especially loved the long paragraphs, the long dialogues with the detectives, while Raskolnikov kept thinking that he would be able to evade capture forever. I really loved moments like that in which you can really feel the emotions that Raskolnikov could be going through, the entire agony of wondering whether anybody would find him out. All of those things, I think it was written very well. I mean, of course it was. It's a really famous book. A lot of people have probably read it already, but I loved it very much and I would highly recommend it. So hopefully you got a few ideas for your next read. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I will be back again next year with another best books video, but hopefully I can also film and upload many other videos in that interval. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye!